Welcome to the Vamos Morados podcast on the State of Louisville Podcast Network. I am Zach, as usual, here with Benton as usual, but not as usual. We have got Mr. USL Tactics himself, John Morrissey, with us this week. John, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm excited to talk about a team that I'm excited about and to be with both of you. So yeah, thrilled to be here.
Now, John, for those people who are not familiar with your work, can you kind of like walk us through your background and why we're having you on?
Yeah, I guess it was right after the COVID break in the USL. I kind of got started on Twitter, just posting about tactics, stats, that sort of thing in the context of the USL. It's become a sort of vaguely journalism centric side hobby for me. But yeah, I feel like I probably watch as much USL soccer as any human being in existence, and I hope that I can add a little bit of detail on Louisville City.
And you're not only doing the stuff on Twitter, but you're on with the USL show regularly. You start working with the Backheeled group, which I think's super cool. Like you've gotten your hands in a lot of things on top of having worked for what, two different teams, different points of time, right?
Yeah, I got to have a year-long internship with Tampa Bay and Sacramento.
That's awesome. That probably got you some cool insight, kind of behind the curtains.
Oh,
But
absolutely. Yeah,
I,
great opportunity.
I know I like to periodically pick your brain and get you on here because you bring one thing that Zach and I can't bring to the table, and that's a more unbiased perspective, or at least not pro Louisville bias. And
I would say biased in a different direction.
yeah. But I like to use that as kind of level setting, like are we, are optimistic or pessimistic for the right reasons? And you're a top guy to help us figure that out. But before we get started with things, we want to talk to what we've been into. It's been a long off season. So, John, and anything during this off season period, whether it's recent or in the past, been capturing your interest in the non-soccer realm?
Yeah, I think a double header here. I'm in the middle of a project where, well, let me back it up. I'm a bit of a movie buff, and I'm on this project of I'm trying to watch every movie that has ever won the Best Picture Oscar. So dating back to, I think, Wings in 1927, which is like this black and white silent World War One movie, all the way through Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I saw in theaters. So that's been really rewarding. Then this past week, if we're getting real recent, I went and saw Dune 2, and I love the thing. I've never read the actual Dune book, like despite being that kind of nerd. But man, the movie absolutely ruled. So like go check that out if you're anybody who just like wants a spectacle on the big screen, honestly.
Did
I
you
have
ever
one
watch the old
very
one?
I just watched the David Lynch version of it from what, 1982, 1984, like literally yesterday. It's kind of a mess, but it's fun. But like what yeah, what Denis Villeneuve is doing with the material, really bearing it out. Because it's like a 900-page book. Like it can be two movies and really bear that weight. But yeah, really fun, really spectacular.
the 80s one really bears the signs of like we started this project intending for this to be two movies and we're told we were not allowed to have it be two movies towards the very end. They just have to like throw a bunch of stuff in like monologues and yeah. There's one very important question though, John. Did you get the popcorn tub?
I did not get the popcorn tub. I'm scared of the popcorn tub. Like it's just too much for me.
I think I've seen a picture of it. It's like when the sandworms, right?
It's the sandworm's mouth,
And so much
and
more.
the joke on the internet is they did make it look like a butt.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, I know. I saw the first one. I'm gonna have to watch it. It was good, but like I wasn't like obsessed with it. I don't know. Maybe I need to watch it back again. Kind of like I
That's
remember watching Lord of the
fairly.
Rings the
I
first
didn't.
time. Oh, it didn't wasn't like wasn't
Yeah,
like head over heels obsessed, but it definitely grew on me.
I like the
I
David
didn't
Lynch
love
one
the
in like
first
a
one.
train wreck
Yeah,
fun kind of way.
yeah.
Ben, what have you been into?
Well, over the break, I totally like dialed out of soccer. Like I didn't watch like any at all. Like usually I'll turn on like some like European soccer, Premier League, whatnot, but like I didn't like I just stayed completely away with it. Not because I dislike the sport or anything anymore. I just felt like I needed a break. And one thing I've gotten into, obviously, we're in the road to WrestleMania right now. That is the first part of the year between from Royal Rumble to WrestleMania. And during that time period, I start watching a lot of like indie wrestling. So like a lot of like smaller promotions. I went to see kind of like what else was out there style wise and whatnot. And that's been a lot of fun exploring. And more recently, I got the game Helldivers 2, which if you guys aren't familiar with that, it's basically like Starship Troopers, like that movie. It's basically like a game for that, and it is so much fun. Me and my cousin and I, we loved the first one, but it was like it didn't get like a lot of reception. It wasn't a very like big game. And so for a long time we've been tracking on Helldivers 2. We're getting really excited about it. And so to see that game's kind of like really like blown up and got a lot of like really mainstream attention has been super cool. And in fact, after we're done recording here, I'm probably going to be firing it up. So,
See, I've never
all
heard of
over the
that, but
place right
just like
now.
looking it up, it looks like a blast.
oh, it is so much fun. They had a rocky launch as far as like matchmaking and some technical stuff like that. But like when you get into the games, like it is super cool and it's very chaotic. I just did a mission last night and there was these like giant boss bugs. It was like the hard difficulty level, and I've never been so immersed in combat in a game. Like I was stressed out. I'm running around throwing grenades at my feet and running away because I have these trail of bugs coming at me. It was just like, whew, it was fun. It was rewarding finishing that. So I'm really enjoying that. Now, Zach, what have you been into lately? I haven't seen you in a hot minute.
Yeah, no, we have talked a while. So I guess I'll also bring up a couple things because it's been a long off season. Me and Lori have been really enjoying it's like a limited. There might be another season, but I think it's like a limited run series animation on HBO called Scavenger's Reign. It's like a sci-fi a group of people crash land on a planet full of terrifying alien life. There's a psychic frog that's kind of the main villain. It's pretty wild. It's very stressful. It kind of feels like I think I mentioned a little back. I was reading that book about exploring the Amazon, and it actually kind of ties in with the show a lot because it's like, what if you were trapped in the Amazon, but also you didn't know what anything was at all, and anything could be like cute and fluffy or kill you at any moment. So it's a very, very, very good show. And then video game wise, I have been playing Tears of the Kingdom, the most recent Legend of Zelda game, because I sort of missed it when it came out. I was busy, and I finally have had time to go around to it, and have been immersed in that. It's like a physics toolbox puzzle. I get to keep just strapping rockets to things and seeing what happens. So that's been fun.
When that came out, I saw this really cool video where like this person is like just trying to jump from like the highest point, and the game is like very vertical for those not familiar. Like there's a lot of like stuff in the sky, and there's even like stuff underground. This dude like found like the highest point in the game and jumped, and it went like right through a hole in the earth. Like it was literally like 5 minutes of Link just falling through the air. Like he fell through this hell, and he's thrown through this like giants like just like tunnel in the ground. It was just absolutely insane. And to think that like of all systems, like the Switch is the one that like has all of that. It's
Yeah,
super cool.
the underground is kind of one of the craziest parts of it because I had saw people having fun, but I had looked up a bunch of stuff on the game on purpose because I had wanted to play it. And I didn't even know that the underground was a thing in it until I jumped down a hole and started exploring, and I was like, is there an entire map-sized underground map underneath everything that I didn't realize was here the whole time? So that was fun.
Like I'm just imagining now going like me playing Skyrim for the first time and going into a cave and not realizing that's a whole like secondary like world there.
Yeah.
Thank God that wasn't the case. I would have been still be playing that game. Oh goodness. All right. It's time to focus. It's time to talk about Louisville City. So, John, to kick us off, I just kind of want to get your like super like high level thoughts on all the offseason moves. I think by this point, everybody listening is probably familiar with what's happened, so we don't need to rehash all that. But kind of what's your take on the team's composition now? You know, especially considering last season.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll get into details, but I think at a high level, this team they got better. They added players with like genuine all USL talent. They got deeper at almost every position. They're one of few teams in the USL that feels like they're maybe too deep at every single spot. And I feel like they addressed a lot of the deficiencies where you were sort of caught between tactical systems, the way that you wanted to play, and they've really wanted players that can go either way, but fit what the model was last season. I did a piece, and you mentioned backfield, where I was grading every team's offseason, and I think I had Louisville top three, top four, really high on what this team did, how they improved over the winter.
Yeah, I know personally, it felt like a lot of the moves they made, particularly the additions, like they just made so much sense as far as fitting into the system that we like to play. And when we'll talk more about formations and stuff, but not only kind of our back three set, or excuse me, the 4-3-3, which has kind of been a long time staple of the team, but also the back three that Coach Cruz has obviously been very fond of and using more and more regularly. And we got a lot of players that make like a ton of sense in both of those systems and bring a lot like different skill sets to it. So I was just really impressed on how many boxes like each of these guys like checked, considering those kind of two play styles. Now,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, just to speak to it, I think that if it is a back three, you've certainly got the talent for that, but there is the flexibility to stay in 4-3-3, depending on the matchup, depending on which players are in form. So just a really impressive effort from Coach Cruz, from the entire front office and how they've assembled things.
now heading into 2024, obviously there were kind of some needs like last season. Yeah, we made it to our standard Eastern Conference final appearance, but it was about as uncomfortable as it could have been for the fans. Not the best season in the world by our standards. Now, as far as like whatever I guess you would have perceived as the needs for the team, do you feel that they addressed all of them? And if not, like what are still kind of some lingering question marks that you have about the squad?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about what I would have flagged coming into the offseason, it was a center back spot where Jordan Scarlett was out for most of the year. Ramsey Kouasmi never really got into the mix in his rookie season. So adding depth there, I don't know if they went overboard in that regard, but getting someone like Artur Ordonez, who has like more than 60 appearances in total in 2 seasons, he's like the reigning defender of the year. He's somebody who I rate incredibly highly. That's the sort of move that completely clears out any worries I had in defense. There were questions in the central midfield, more so in getting that top level quality that's really going to hold things together, that can do a bit of a defensive job, but link play with the attacking line. And going out and getting David Davila, who's another all league level of player, that just clears any questions you have. And given what happened with Amadou Dia and the wing back spots, the fact that Manny Perez was sold over to Europe, the depth that was added there is equally impressive. So I think by and large, everything that this team did was focused on filling out the roster with players who can compete at the USL level, who have proven that they're really up to snuff to compete not only like just as an average starter, but do the job in a playoff context. Like they've added a ton of talent that has really outperformed that replacement level standard and shown that they can compete at what Louisville wants to be, a team that's going to get to the Eastern Conference Finals and maybe go further.
Now, you mentioned Jordan Scarlett, and one thing I keep thinking about last season, obviously there were a lot of problems, and this wouldn't have solved everything. But I played the what if game in my head. If he was available for much more of the season that he was, like how things would have changed. I mean, there were still obviously a lot of problems, like our offense was probably arguably a little bit more of the issue than the defense. And yeah, I felt that we got kind of hard done, I think, on the officiating front, like big picture. There were some pretty like really impactful calls. And again, I try to stay away from that debate, but there were just a few kind of glaring ones. I thought that was a net negative. But yeah, like what if we had Jordan Scar? Like how much better would things have been?
Scarlett's a guy who in Tampa Bay, who, I mean, they're really the other team alongside Louisville that has kind of set the standard for what success means in the USL. And Scarlett had success in that system. He was somebody who was part of the New York Red Bulls, two teams that were actually good. Like, if he was able to contribute and had that extra presence in the back, he's excellent on his own, but he gives you so much more tactical flexibility on top of it. And that's probably why mid-season you go out and get a Kyle Adams to try to add that necessary depth. But just having like four really solid center backs coming into the year, that's invaluable for what Danny Cruz probably wants to do tactically this year.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna have any problems where we're scrambling to find a replacement. And if we are, then we got hit by the injury bug real bad.
Yeah, I feel like we're gonna curse ourselves by saying this, but
Yeah, knock on wood.
the center back position is deep enough that like they can handle a couple injuries, and even some of the other players they have are versatile enough that even with a couple center back injuries, they can sort of shuffle the shape around a bit and absorb a lot of that. So
Yeah,
uh,
that's a great point.
so we had you mentioned I really liked I guess I'll plug it your off season or your preseason column that you put up on your Substack is really nice. You've got an in-depth sort of look at each and every team. You mentioned uh the departures. So Louisville lost 23 years of combined uh tenure at Louisville just with Lancaster, Paolo, and Oscar. Are there any departures you think the team should be concerned about? I mean, because it was so much tenure, that is all players that were sort of later on in their careers. Do you think Louisville's going to be missing anything moving forward off the roster?
Think that as tough as it can be to lose some of those players, like you mentioned, those big three who have been around forever, but someone like a Tyler Gibson who was really involved in a lot of the season, but he is above that 30-year-old line where he's maybe getting over the hill to an extent. Like you think about maybe an Mushagalusa who he showed a lot of sparks, but the consistency never really came. You don't like to lose a lot of those players. They've all been replaced, other than maybe Lancaster, and I suspect we'll hit on that a little bit more. But like when you think about it, Del Piccolo, Taylor Davila can do a lot of what he did, and you're gonna miss that locker room presence and everything, certainly. But on the field, I feel like most of the exits have been supplemented really well. Even someone like a Semla who really broke out unexpectedly as a rookie player. Like Las honestly might be the goalkeeper of the year in the USL. Like he's got that level of talent in him. So I think by and large, it stings to take that mandate off, but it's towards a purpose that's going to mean a lot when it gets down to it. When this team really can run and run, has a little bit more youthful energy, has more flexibility. So I'm positive about most of the departures. Like they make sense from where this club is trying to go.
Yeah, you mentioned loss, and one thing that stood out to me when we signed him is that there were a lot of like upset Austin fans that he wasn't going to be starting for them. And that basically told me everything that I need to know. They were ready for him to get in between the sticks for them. I'm like, all right, if he's shown to be good enough at the MLS level, then I think he'll do just fine here.
Well, and Louisville
Yeah, I
City
ended
kind of
up
has a
go
history
ahead.
of jumping from keeper to keeper and never losing a step. Seems like it's we've been very fortunate and I at that position to just always have someone ready to step up whenever anybody leaves.
Plus, I think he had nearly an 80% save percentage in MLS Next Pro last season. Like that's completely unmatched if you're mapping over to the USL. That was a very mediocre Austin team, and he took them literally to a title. I was a fan of what Semla did, certainly, but I think Loss really brings an elite presence in a way that this club is going to appreciate when we get down to it.
And well, I hope he brings that same level for us this season. In speaking of new arrivals, I had a few questions on that front. First one is, I want to know who you thought was the best overall pickup, and I will give you bonus points if you'll name somebody other than Ordonez, because we know he's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's the obvious one for sure, but Adrian Perez, in terms of how this team has evolved in their play style, is going to be unbelievably important. If you're thinking about that possibility of playing a back three, defensively, that's going to sit deep in a 5-4-1 shape. Perez is somebody who's played right back in his career. If you think about him moving from what's going to be a right winger position in possession, he has the work rate, he has the technique to come back and really contribute defensively. But in the final third is where he's obviously going to pay off. He's somebody who was in the double digits for the goal contributions last year with San Diego Loyal. What stands out is his ability to beat players on the dribble, that amazing technique and ball control. I think he's got a bit of indoor soccer experience, and you can
Yep.
see that in the way that he takes players on. When Louisville, who is a very possessively dominant team, typically in how they want to play, gets settled into the final third, it's not always easy to beat opponents, to force them to rotate and lose their sense of shape. Perez, in that ball control, in the way that he's able to get past defenders, really makes opponents bend. That's going to get him to the end line where he's able to put in crosses. That's going to pay off handsomely for Wilson Harris, Brian Ownby, whoever else is in the front line. I think that holistically, he's somebody who really changes this team for the better. And I think he's going to have a huge season.
I feel I'm really happy that you really called Perez out, because he's the one that I've really had circle on that list. Like, he just feels like, of all the players, the most perfect fit for what we're trying to do, and could be the guy that we look back on and say, wow, that was an absolute steal. Again, like, we know Ordonez is like really awesome, and I expect to be thinking the same thing at the end of the season. But Perez was the one I kind of viewed more as the sleeper, is not the right term, but the one that's going to get a lot more credit and recognition after the fact than maybe it does right now.
Yeah, I think somehow, because evaluating all the moves, he had statistically he had a really really great season last year, and I feel like I did not hear a lot about him. He sort of, for as good of a year as he had, flew under the radar. So I am very excited to see him here.
Yeah, and I mean, he obviously has that experience at the MLS level, and really the only reason that came to an end is because of injuries. So I like it when you know a guy like has certified credentials to be playing in a league above, but the only reason he's not is because he got dealt, a bad hand. So hoping there's a little bit of a chip on his shoulder to get back up the ranks. That's also going to kind of fuel that fire a little bit. And what better place to showcase your talents than Louisville?
He's somebody who started last year a little bit slowly. Like he took some time to get used to San Diego. And then he was never in the spotlight because the storyline for that team was the fact that like they're no longer existing and everyone's really sad about it. But I think that in the context of Lou City, he's gonna shine and really become kind of the superstar that he deserves to be based on the talent that he brings.
That's awesome. Now, my next question was on the best team and system fit. I feel like he's probably high up on that list for you as far as what Louisville's trying to accomplish and what he brings to the table. Um, since we've kind of talked about him at length already, is there anybody else that like just jumps out to you as like, wow, that was such a perfect pickup for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think Perez is almost a change of pace for what we've seen traditionally. And Gleedle, Sam Gleedle is the guy who, if you're thinking about classic Lou City soccer, he's somebody who really fits the bill. He's got the work rate, the tenure as both a fullback and a winger, that he's constantly going to contribute in the press. He's never going to complain about it. He's very quick. Like he has the grit combined with the technique that you want this team to have. He's going to be, I think I've heard from you that he's going to be mostly at the wingback spot. And honestly, like that's when he just came over from Monterey Bay, obviously. Monterey Bay was at their best when they had him at wingback, when he could get end to end, really come in with these secondary runs, these overlaps from out wide, and do damage almost as the secondary option that surprises the defense, makes these clever runs, but he's got the technique at the same time as more of a proper forward. Like you saw him in that deployment in San Antonio in a prior stop. He's got a very complete game overall that I think is going to play well and I think fits into that very pressureful brand of soccer that Louisville has typically preferred.
Now, one thing that stood out to me about him was the fact that we went out and like we paid for him. Like that was a paid transfer. And I don't know if you know any sort of number off the top of your head, but like in the past few years, like I feel like you can count the number of transfers like that, like within the USL or like to a USL club. Like you probably count them on like one hand. So I found that very unusual, and that spoke volumes as far, to me at least, as far as like what the team thought he would bring to the mix. So he's somebody else I'm going to have a kind of super close eye on as far as the contributions.
Yeah, and if you, I mean, you think about him off the field as well, he's a genuinely great guy. Like the San Antonio community still adores him. Beyond that, like you absolutely hit the nail on the head that you probably have seen less than 10 paid transfers within the league. Like there's a reason you go out and get a Gleedle, and it's because not only can he be a workhorse, but he really fits the vision for where this club is going.
Yeah. And,
I
and
really,
for, go ahead, Zach.
I was gonna say that really jives with when we spoke with Danny earlier in the offseason. He mentioned like a big difference between last offseason and this offseason. Now that he's had another year of experience, was he really said he was prioritizing personality and locker room and team ethic fit rather than just on the field play. So someone like Sam Believe, I think you can see that focus.
Yeah, I was going to comment that on as well. A lot more emphasis on the, I guess the like the locker room sort of component. And I was pretty much immediately told by the media team, like, you're going to want to interview this guy. And I heard him talk to the media once, and I'm like, okay, I get it. Yeah, he's very outgoing, seems incredibly approachable, nice. Like the fact that you said the San Antonio people still love him doesn't shock me at all. So I'm really eager to hear from him more, especially as we get to kind of see him in action.
I don't know if you've ever had the phenomenon of players having very active family on social media,
Oh
but
yeah. Yeah.
interacted with Sam's family quite a bit, and unlike maybe some USL parents, I've found Sam's family to be incredibly amicable whenever I've interacted. So I think that, I mean, it speaks well of him as well. Like just a great addition to the broader community of Lou City.
Yeah, there's a few players on the Louisville City team whose family members are active on social media. Thankfully, none of them like are difficult or anything. But yeah, I know the phenomenon you're
Apatosh is
talking about.
very active at the
Oh
stadium.
yeah, he's there visibly a lot, and I see yeah, and I see a lot of family names for other people popping up on likes and comments and stuff as well. Um, Last question on the new arrivals. Who to you is the most intriguing? Is there anybody that has kind of, I guess, question marks like surrounding them, or they just stand out for any particular reason?
Think I'm going to point to Jaylen Davila on this one, just because he's been a bit of a chameleon in his career. He's always been very good, but in Los Angeles, it tended to be a bit more of you're going to stick him deep in a double pivot within the 4-2-3-1. You're going to have him circulate the ball, really be a creator from these deep lying positions. He could do that in Louisville. You put Dylan Maris, you put Elijah Winder further upfield. That makes sense as a pairing. He really broke out with Rio Grande Valley because of the ability to get box to box. Yes, he retained that ability to sit deep and create. I think he grew as somebody who could hit a diagonal, hit a long ball, and do a ton of damage. That he was bombing forward, getting to the edge of the box where he could either dictate play, have that shooting threat, do it on set pieces as well. So the way that he's deployed is sort of the question mark for me. Like, there's no doubt that he's going to be a very good addition. I'm curious what role he plays and how that impacts the lineup choices of who he's partnering with in the midfield, what that means for the tactics. Like, I think that's going to be a real kind of way to read what Louisville is looking to do this season.
Now, I guess one thing I'll share is I've seen this team play twice now. I saw them against Lexington, and then I saw them in the friendly against Pittsburgh. Granted, this is at like a local like park, so you're very much like watching like at ground level. When I very much appreciate the kind of the top down view, like when you're looking at shape and whatnot. He, at least to me, there appeared to be kind of playing like a more of like a central sort of a midfield role. He was getting up quite a bit as well. So I kind of had initially viewed him as sort of like a Tyler Gibson sort of replacement, but I don't feel like they're the same exact profile. I think he could probably do a lot of the same things. He just gets more in the action. The one thing that did stand out to me about the midfield, and we'll see if this is a continued thing or not, it struck me that like Elijah was playing a little more back than he does normally. I always viewed him more of an attacking sort of midfielder, a little more offensive oriented, defensive. But in the two matches that I saw, he was, I'm not going to say not in the action, the attack. It was just less prominent than what I recall it being in the past. So I don't know if maybe, it's just a small sample size we're dealing with here, or if he's going to have a little bit of a role change. So take all
Well,
that with a grain of salt.
he had a full game at center back last year, so I guess he's ready to play defensive midfielder.
He's got the size to really kind of slot in anywhere. So I don't dislike that. And I think that it probably activates what the best thing that Davila brings is the ability to really impact the game at every level and have that freedom. So wouldn't be surprised to see more of that sort of alignment.
Yeah, we didn't get the win in the Pittsburgh friendly. Not that wins losses care in that context, but he was one that particularly stood out to me. I thought he had a really strong game, so I got more excited about him after seeing that one. Not that I wasn't already, but um, let's talk tactics a little bit, right? It's in your username online. Um,
Oh, now we
from
get to Ben's favorite question.
well, just I think it's a point to talk about. I think it's interesting, right? Now, I mean, obviously we've talked about this briefly before, but obviously in the past we've used a lot of the back four setup. It looks like we're leaning more and more towards kind of a back three usage. I mean, as far as all the transactions and whatnot that we saw, do you kind of agree that we're probably going to be seeing more of that this season than we have in the past? And if so, I guess kind of what's your thoughts on the team's play style and the two shapes, and if you're expecting anything different?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly based on especially bringing in Ordonez with the fact that you've got a pretty talented and technically gifted central defensive unit already. That to me is the giveaway that this team is going to prefer the back three by and large heading into 2024. If you're thinking about the difference in systems, it's obviously having that extra man in the midfield in a classic 4-3-3 that this team has preferred. That can be useful when you're possessing in the middle of the pitch. That can be useful in the press when you've got an extra body further upfield automatically, just because that's a midfielder versus a defender, right? I think what the back three gives you is more of an opportunity to use those center backs and push them up into the channels when you're initiating out of the back. That's certainly one way that it happens. But I think having the extra defender is also useful when you're defending against the counterattack, right? Like you've got an extra body back there to be that safety net to make sure your team isn't going to get beat over the top when you're in that transitional phase of the game. I think by having the extra body, you're also able to get a bit more aggressive with how you're deploying the fullbacks. So someone like an Amadou Dia, someone like a Sam Gleedle, they know that there's an extra defender back there by the nature of the shape. They're that much freer to get upfield, push up into the final third of the pitch, serve in those crosses, make those clever overlaps and underlaps, do damage and add that extra presence in attack. Given the fact that Lou City really turned into a bit more of a direct kind of long ball heavy team last season relative to prior years, having that ability to let those wingbacks really get upfield is going to be useful. And I think that it, as a trend within the passing profile of this team, is probably something that's going to continue. Just the fact that you've got those wingbacks who can push And if you're thinking about the 3-4-3 setup, really make like a front five, having five players who can pursue those long balls, counter press to keep the ball in the final third. The talent is there to really pull off that system. So rambling a bit, but I do think the back three is the way to go, just given the roster construction.
Now, I guess, are there any other sort of like play style tweaks or adjustment that you're expecting like from the squad?
I think the overall approach of tending to be a little bit longer in the way that you're building out of the back, counter pressing really hard, relying on the central midfield, whether it's Davila and Maris, whoever you're putting to rely on them for those late arriving runs into the box in attack. Perez certainly providing the dribbling. I don't know if it's necessarily a change in style from what we saw last season overall, but I think that the talent on this team is much more aligned to that sort of system in a way that's going to make the overall strategy more effective, pay off on a more regular basis within that continual framework of, yes, you're maintaining the pressure, yes, you're being possessive, but you're doing it in a way that isn't like that Mark Lowry ball, for instance, if you're thinking about Indy and El Paso, where it's just all short passing. Like that's not going to be what this team does, but you're going to get the high defensive line, certainly, because Ordonez and Tosh have the ability to really push up to midfield, but recover back. So, yeah, I think overall it's not going to be a revolution tactically, but it's going to be a sharpening of the approach that we've seen.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think some of the moves that they made, even though the shape may change, will allow the team to get back to some things that they got away from a little bit last season. Because it does feel like to me last season they had issues getting burned on counters early in the season, and it seems like the team sort of backed away from the high line that they've historically played as a way to button down the defense a little better. And I think that kind of cascaded into having trouble scoring last season. They did fix their defensive issues for the most part, but I think it was sort of at the expense of getting goals. And I think like adding defenders and being able to play a three back is gonna allow the team to raise that line up higher again, like we've historically seen from the team. And I think that will allow them to, even if it's a different shape, actually play more of the kind of high line that we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about the high line, like Ordonez is somebody who, in his instinct, in his ability to intervene, in his ability to recover if you are beaten, he's built for that style of play. Importantly, that really compresses the field. It doesn't let opponents beat you on the counter because you are packing it in so tight. You're not allowing for those passes over the top. So I think it's going to be a virtuous cycle where Louisville is going to be able to keep the ball more effectively and also deny counterattacks in a real tangible sort of way.
I have written here, I want to talk about strengths and weaknesses. I feel like we've kind of talked about a lot of the strengths already, but please feel free to share any additional ones that we might not have touched on. But I am particularly curious to hear kind of your thoughts on weaknesses, like in what teams do you expect to be a problem based on those weaknesses?
Yeah, I think I'm going to hit the weaknesses on two fronts. One being kind of the lack of that holding midfielder, that Tyler Gibson sort of player. And while I think that the choice to move on from Gibson was certainly defensible, it made a lot of sense just given how you want to adapt Louisville City going forward. There's something to be said for having somebody who is so cerebral, so able to put in those important tackles to kind of hold down the fort in front of the back line. Maybe you get some of that from a Carlos Mogul who continues to grow and evolve as a player. But I think that by and large, you're not really seeing a ton of that presence on the roster right now. So I think that's something to flag. And then when I was thinking about the possibility of, okay, you're a team approaching Louisville City, how are you going to try and beat them? Like, attacking, or rather counterattacking with speed has to be the way to do it. I know I just praised the high line, but as good as it is, it still introduces vulnerabilities. Like
Mhm.
that's the natural give and take of the system. So if you're thinking about like a specific team that could really take advantage in the East, I think Hartford, who, despite the fact that they were completely horrible last season, they've realigned themselves in a way that they're going to be disgustingly good on the counter. They've added so much speed on the wings. That's where you start to worry, okay, what if they get a runner in behind when the Diaz, when the Gleagles are so far upfield in attack? You've got to look out for that. I'm thinking about the same thing from a team like El Paso, for instance, who, I mean, notably early last season kind of beat Louisville, beat that high line in a way that I would argue pretty much changed the outlook and approach for a lot of what happened in 2023. And they're going to be having that same style again. So that would be maybe the one glaring spot right now. But I think the beauty of this roster is that, as we've really hit on, you've got the depth to adjust if you have an opponent like that on the schedule. Like you are going to be able to recognize Hartford is coming in, or for instance, with a very particular style of play. We have a lot of the pieces we need to be able to kind of counteract that and maybe be less doctrinal, be a bit less married to the back three if we need to be in this one given week.
I'm glad you brought up Tyler Gibson because as a high-ranking official of the Tyler Gibson fan club, that's the departure that I struggle with the most. You know, I can rationalize pretty much all of them, and I can even rationalize that one to an extent, but that's one that it just doesn't feel good no matter how you slice it. So I'm hopeful that Carlos can help fill that void, or one of the other new guys like Taylor Davila might kind of help fill that role.
Yeah. Well, and just on the Gibson point, I've been pretty much talking about him as like the best defensive midfielder in the history of the league from most of the winter. Like, as much as it makes sense, it always hurts to lose somebody like that.
Yeah, he's I love those guys that are purely of that mold, that defensive midfielder. Another one that comes to mind, not a USL guy, is like Michael Bradley, like particularly, I guess the older variation of him, like just like so smart on the field, and a lot of their contributions are things that don't show up on the stat sheet. Probably not going to be on the highlight reel. Like I just have a deep appreciation for what those guys bring to the table. Now, Louisville City, I mean, we've talked a lot about what they can do, what they can't do. The players we've brought in. Kind of curious to hear what's your predictions for this team. How far is it going to go? And do you have any kind of inkling of who you might think like might lead for things like goals and assists? Who's going to be starting game in, game out, things like that?
Yeah, I just had my like power ranking season prediction thing out today. I've got Louisville second in the East right now. I think it's really tight between them and Charleston, who obviously won the conference last season. I think they're going to be dueling at the top of the table for most of the year to come. They feel like the two teams that are the most complete. They've most filled out their squads with a very specific tactical vision in mind. And I mean, I think if you look at last year, where this is a Louisville team that finished with a negative goal difference, probably underperformed in the table from where everyone thought they were going to be. It's going to be really return to classic form where this team is going to be in the mix for the, do we call it the supporter shield in the USL? Whatever the equivalent is for that.
You know, I've never heard an official name for it. So whenever I'm writing about, it, I'm like, how do I phrase this? Need some more clear
Best
branding
no
on that one.
regular season champion.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in terms of the leaders, I'm thinking, and we haven't really hit on the striker spot and Wilson Harris and all that. I will say that's probably the one position where got a little bit of pause. Like, I know Cameron Lancaster maybe wasn't the classic guy who's scoring 20 goals for fun. He still had a lot to offer. You're essentially replacing him with Tola Shoanmi, who, well, I wrote a piece about him earlier in the winter. I think he's got tons of potential. I think he fits into the press rather nicely. He's not an out and out goal scorer. And Harris was good last year. I think he had 9 goals, maybe. Can he be that consistent number 9 who really is putting opponents under pressure? And in doing so, he's opening up space for Ownby and Perez to do damage. That's the big question. I love Wilson Harris, and I think he's going to lead this team in goals and do what he needs to do. But that is a slight worry. And then just with some other leaders, I think Perez is going to lead the team in assists. I think he's maybe going to be in the mix for the most assists in the USL period. Minutes wise, probably Ordonez or Damian Loss. Like goalkeepers are weird. That almost feels like cheating as long
Yeah,
as he
yeah.
stays healthy. But yeah, Ordonez is somebody who I think I mentioned earlier, like more than 30 matches played in each of the last 2 years in Pittsburgh. And that's a Pittsburgh system where Bob Lilly like will just drop players for absolutely no good reason. So the fact that he earned that trust and had the consistency to stay in the lineup, he's going to be nailed on for Louisville all year long.
And again, this is why we bring you on, so you can tell us what we believe we already know and that we're going to be good. So it feels good hearing it from you, somebody who's watched as much USL as any other human over the past few seasons. So, um, and you touched
I am.
on. Go ahead, Zach.
I was gonna say one great thing about having you on though is you know way more about all the other teams than we ever will. So I am kind of curious to get your take on sort of the other teams in the East. Do we think it's going to be the kind of Charleston, Tampa Bay, Louisville up top? Are there any teams you think may surprise us? You mentioned Hartford retooled. North Carolina, it's going to be a new team in the mix. And what are your thoughts on who you think the strongest competition in the East is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, Charleston and Tampa Bay, like, well, Tampa Bay always is in the mix. They do have new management, and it's Robbie Nielsen, who basically he was a defender in his pro career, and he likes the back three, like everyone else who has ever coached Tampa Bay. They're going to be the same team as always. I've really got an eye on North Carolina. They didn't stomp over League One last season, but they were really, really good. They returned all of their good League One players, and then they've added Paco Craig. They got Rodrigo da Costa, who a former All League player, Evan Conway, who was a standout alongside Perez with San Diego. They've kind of taken the core of a team that probably would have been competitive for the playoffs last season if they were up a league, and then added a handful of just bona fide stars. Rhode Island, the expansion team, one to watch for sure. Getting Albert Dickwa, the reigning MVP and Golden Boot winner, a real statement of intent for them. They've got a couple interesting pieces out of MLS and MLS Next Pro that really have shown some potential. A couple of cerebral pickups from the San Diego and Pittsburgh systems. You always worry with an expansion side, they're going to take a minute to hit the ground running. I think when they get clicking, they're going to be a threat.
I had no idea that Paco Craig ended up on
Yeah.
North Carolina. I totally missed that one. That is a big pickup for them. Good for them.
Yeah, I actually only
Bit of a
found that
black
out
hole,
reading
but
the season preview to get ready for this.
there we go. Really,
All right.
anybody who was in or out of Miami is kind of a black hole. Like that team is just no media attention whatsoever. So
No fans either.
Yeah,
So
no fans.
no fans, yeah.
it's a weird one. So
Well, if we do want to think about a team that's going to be interesting, Miami, they're going to be terrible. Like if I could put
Good.
any prediction with a sports book, like Miami dead last, probably a pretty safe bet. They've lost, I think, 80% of their minutes played. They replaced them with like League One average players and like 19-year-olds from Serie C in Italy.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's going to be a tough season.
they've got nobody coming back. I'm looking at their roster now.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, if there's a team that's going to struggle, like, yeah, I'd write down Miami. I'd be all right with that. Not one probably in it for the long haul. Out west, I know we don't get to play them nearly as much. Can you kind of talk us through what the landscape's looking like over there? Teams to watch. Anybody that's gonna be hilariously bad?
Nobody hilariously bad, unfortunately. A lot of parity. I think Sacramento is going to pretty easily win the conference, or at least win it in the regular season yet again. They returned basically their whole lineup and added Trevor Amon from League One, the player who had more goals than any player in American soccer last season. So rich getting richer. Phoenix, the defending champs, are a team that's going to be interesting to see. Like they lost Danny Trejo, who got sold to Poland. Manuel Arriaga got traded to Tampa Bay in what was kind of a weird move for Phoenix. Carlos Harvey went to MLS. Like those are probably their three best players, all out the door. I've been hearing some really mediocre things about how their preseason has gone. I don't necessarily think that they've replaced the goal scoring well. They're still going to be, I mean, and they also lost their head coach, Juan Guerra, to take an MLS assistant job. So they're going to be fine. Like they're going to be in the playoffs, but I think that the magic that they had at the end of last year isn't replicable. If there was a team that I'm most interested in, it's probably New Mexico. You look at the lineup and you've probably heard of none of their players. Like it's a lot of young guys who were exciting in MLS Next Pro, or they had a couple of good appearances in the USL, but never were a nailed on starter. But I'm a real believer in Eric Quill, who took over as their manager midway through last season. He plays a almost Louisville-ish 4-3-3, really heavy on the press, really fast paced. They might not be good, but they're going to be exciting. And that, I guess that means something if you're just a neutral trying to tune into an evening game.
Now, one team I'm curious to hear you talk about because they're always like, I don't want to say the butt of jokes, but they're definitely like a team that's like seems very weird out of place is the Lights. You already knew this is coming. Um, Kind of what's going on with them? Like the general consensus I get is that they've gotten better. I know one signing I liked it that they got was they got this kid Sean Smart from Clemson, and when they had the College Cup here in Louisville this winter, I remember watching him, and he was like the one player that stood out to me. And I didn't tweet about him, I'm kicking myself now, but I almost tweeted something about like, hey, he's going to be wanting to watch. Hope he ends up in the USL. And lo and behold, he signs with the Lights. So kind of what's going on there in Las Vegas?
Well, just on the smart thing, like you think about that Clemson team, they sent Mohamed Say signed with Greenville in League One. Phoenix really made a splash getting that center back, Pape Marboye.
Oh
So
yeah, I forgot about that one.
talented team. Yeah, and Smart, I mean, was a total standout there. They were purchased obviously by Jose Bautista in January, who brings a lot of the flair and that the star record from being as a really a slugger with the Toronto Blue Jays. This team was really an embarrassment for the USL. I think most people thought they were within 3 years of folding, if we're being quite honest. So to have him come in, splash out for a roster that's quite talented at this point has been great to see. Certainly, if you're a USL fan, like them going out and getting Solomon Asante is the one that catches your eye. I have my doubts if he's going to be that great. He had a pretty mediocre year in Indy last season. But overall, they've assembled a roster with a ton of flexibility, a lot of excitement, and offensive skill on the wing. They're sort of in the New Mexico conundrum where I don't know if this team necessarily congeals into something that makes a lot of sense based on the signings, but they're going to be really fun and interesting to see. So I think that they maybe could get a home field playoff appearance if things congeal correctly for them. But just the fact that Las Vegas is going to be out of the basement is huge. Like they've existed for 6 years now and they've been dead last for four of them. That's embarrassing. And Bautista just isn't going to stand for it. And they're spending like they actually mean business for the first time ever.
They do lead the league in cash dropped from helicopters at halftime, though.
Pretty significantly too.
By a large margin.
And kiddie pools that they're using for seating on the sideline, and llamas that they have on field, and full-time wrestling matches.
I hope they never fold.
I love how chaotic that is. So amazing. And John, I can't believe we didn't talk about this more already. So we're going to do it now. You mentioned Indy, it made me think about we didn't even talk about them. How's the Indy Louisville matchup going to look like? It's going to be the first one on the big CBS, so we'll have a lot of eyeballs on it, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I got to give the context for anyone who's not aware that I'm an Indy native. I've got a little bit of a sweet spot for the 11. They kind of kept everyone around that mattered. They've added pretty decently, getting Augie Williams from Charleston, somebody who's got almost 40 goals over the last 3 years. I mean, heck, they got Tyler Gibson in that midfield. Importantly, and Gibson's going to be important because Aiden Quinn is going to miss the first couple of weeks, possibly months, with a lingering injury. So Gibson's going to be in the mix from day one. I don't think that Indy quite has the upside of a team that can compete for a title, but there's so much veteran presence. There's so much just straight up talent of really proven pieces in this team that they're going to be hovering around probably the 4 or 5 spot in the East, I would say. I think the question mark there is with Sean McCauley, who took over as the manager. He was the interim coach for Minnesota United at the end of the last MLS season, but now Indy is his first legitimate head coaching job for a guy who's, I think, in his 50s. There's a real open question of what tactical system does he want to do. I don't know if he can reinvent the wheel in a way. Like there's a kind of old dogs, new tricks thing with this squad, just given how veteran Indy is. They might end up being the oldest team in the league this year. So expectations shouldn't be through the roof, but they're going to be quite solid again.
I feel like even when Indy isn't having like a stellar season, like big picture, they're always competitive with Louisville, which are what makes rivalry great. So I didn't expect that they weren't going to put up a fight with us particularly, but it's always good to have that perspective on where we're expecting to be in the bigger picture.
It's always the best derby game. Yeah.
It's been very fun to watch a tongue-in-cheek rivalry become an actual rivalry. I think I feel like the first couple of years of that, it was a very self-aware, like, oh, we're supposed to be rivals because we're close to each other. But I feel like that has grown, especially with a bunch of other rivals departing the league. I think next to Tampa, like Indy has grown into a legitimate rivalry for Louisville City, and it's been very fun.
Yeah, that stuff's good for the league. So John, I guess I'm just going to get your closing thoughts. I didn't know if there's anything else that you want to kind of speak to on whether it's about Louisville, the league as a whole. I'd also for you to be able to share where people can find all your great work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just excited for the year to get going. It's a grind, honestly, because basically every Saturday from March to November, I'm just giving up my entire evening trying to write about 6,000 words or so on what happened on a given night. But yeah, I mean, if you want to see what I'm doing, it's at USL Tactics on Twitter, where I'm posting everything that I'm writing, posting tons of video breakdowns, that sort of thing. For the written word, definitely check out Backheeled and consider a subscription. That's going to be really the centerpiece of what I'm trying to do in covering the league. Once a week, coming in with the power ranking where talking about the tactical decisions, the lineup choices, the news of the week for every single club. Beyond that, I've got a Substack, also USL Tactics. You can get on the mailing list there, absolutely free. Not quite sure what form that's going to take in the regular season, but I'm kind of addicted to just like writing random things at any given time at this point. So if you're a USL nerd, you won't regret a subscription to that.
That's the beauty of it, right? You're your own boss. You can write whatever the hell you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anything that's like too niche and too stupid for not Shield, which tries to be professional, ends up on the Substack. So upside there.
Very good. Zach, you pumped for the season? You ready?
I am very excited for actual non-preseason games to get started.
Now, are you going to go to the upcoming one that's at the stadium?
Probably not. The it's one Knoxville game this weekend.
Yes.
You going to be there?
Yep. I plan to be there.
You're gonna have to tell me how it goes.
It'll be a nice dry run because it'll actually be my like routine of going to the stadium and doing that same whole like thing that I've missed. But yeah, it'll be good to see the team in action again. I'll get my beloved more aerial kind of perspective to kind of see how the pieces like move and gel and whatnot. But I will say, seeing them play like at Thurman's Hutchins was really kind of cool, just because like with the lack of crowd, you can hear everything they're saying. It's like a very different experience of the game. So I do appreciate it, but I'm ready for the regular season. Too bad the start is on the road. Like you mentioned earlier, John, about our troubles with El Paso. They're the first one up for us. So that's I hope it's not like last season where it sets a negative tone, because
I'm
I
glad
think
to
you
get
got
that
it
one out of the
spelled.
way early.
Yeah, right.
Well, yeah, I mean, we mentioned the backfield thing. We've got El Paso as a top 5 team in the league this year. I think they're going to come out and really surprise people.
There we go. Yeah, big tough test early, but we've been doing well against MLS teams in the preseason. So hopefully that translates into the sign of things to come. So. All right. Well, we will go ahead and wrap things up. John, I want to thank you again so much for tuning in. Again, I appreciate everything that you do around the league, and you continually being our outside perspective for the club on understand what's to come. And if you guys aren't already following John's work on all the different social media platforms, make sure that you do. It's really awesome and enlightening seeing kind of already understanding about the opposition when you kind of read through all of his work and whatnot and see what's going on there. So, Zach, any final thoughts? Did I miss anything? Anything else you want to talk to?
I am excited for the season start. I am ready to get some games.
Me too. I'm ready to get back to the grind now. It's been a long enough off season. So, John, best of luck for you. We'll be keeping an eye out on all your work. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning into another episode. Zach and I, we're about to get back in our weekly grind here, talking about Louisville City and Racing Louisville. We should have a Racing Louisville episode similar to this out here in the very near future as well. So keep an eye out for that one. So, all right, take care, and vamos Morados.
Bye, all.